All right, today we're going to look at positive psychology and trying to see if being happy actually helps you become a healthier person. So, we're going to briefly look at the core concepts and the ideas of positive psychology. Just take notes on this, summarize the key elements from the slide. What two ideas do you think are most important per slide? And then you'll use that as you start answering the documentary. You'll start watching one today, and then you'll have next class's lesson to finish it if you don't want to do it over the weekend. But that's kind of our goal for what we'll be looking at for the next two lessons. All right, positive psychology looks at focusing on humans' potential. How can we get the best out of humanity? And so it's a version of health psychology that doesn't look at the things that hurt our health, but rather the things that would help promote health. And focusing on human resiliency. And so undergoing moments of stress doesn't necessarily mean that you will become sick, but these moments of stress will actually motivate you to become a better person. And so what positive psychology focuses on, the main goals of it, is what can we do to optimize these human functionalities to make us be stronger, healthier people. We know that humans have a great ability with creating order and creating meaning within their life, even in the face of adversity. And so seeing these challenges not as threats to our self-esteem, but as motivations to better our self-esteem. This is a challenge that will let me prove myself. And so there's a lot of focus on what is the good life and what makes people happy. And so what positive psychology looks at is this idea of well-being. How can we create wellness within people? All right, we know that wealth doesn't lead to well-being. There's the idea that money brings happiness, and that's not true. So for example, if you look at this picture that you have on the slide, we've seen that income levels on average have risen dramatically across the years. But if you track people's happiness levels, it's relatively standard, pretty stagnant on what percentage of the population feel very happy. And so there is a basic level of income that you need. You need to know that you can meet your basic needs, put food on the table, have a safe shelter to live in. And so poorer countries report lower levels of happiness versus wealthier countries. But being the wealthiest country doesn't necessarily mean you'll be happier. West Germany averages more income than Ireland, but Ireland reports itself to be much happier comparatively between the two. Right? The same thing holds true in France. France is much wealthier, but the happier, healthier Belgian neighbors tend to have the better life. And so what we know is it's not necessarily comfort that leads to well-being and happiness. All right, it's living in poverty will lower your well-being levels, they'll lower your happiness levels, but you don't necessarily need excessive amounts. Diner did a study where they interviewed 50 of the wealthiest Americans. One of them withdrew their results when they knew what the study was about. But they picked the wealthiest people that were listed in Forbes magazine and then randomly sampled lower economic levels from all the income levels and then compared their happiness rates. And they weren't much different. And so our sense of well-being is independent of our sense of wealth. All right, so these are the factors that would lead to a happier life and therefore would help increase resiliency and a better state of well-being. All right, some of it is biological. Your temperament, we talked about this in AP Psychology last year. There are just some people who are naturally easygoing. It takes more to get them angry or upset. And so some people are just naturally happy based off of their biological tendencies. We also find that older individuals tend to be happier than younger individuals. They tend to be more resilient in the fact where if their health becomes poor, they just see it as a natural sense of this is me getting old, and so it doesn't lower their happiness levels even if they aren't naturally healthy, versus a younger person that would be a bigger hit to their happiness levels. And lowering their life satisfaction. And so resiliency might be built on these biological components, right? But cognition also plays a role, right? If you have a positive outlook on life, you tend to have a better sense of well-being. We know from our stress unit and the biopsychosocial model of health psychology that pessimism is a very big health detriment. Well, we find the opposite is true for happiness, that optimism leads to higher cases of well-being and self-contentment. When people are high achievers, they also can have better senses of well-being. They focus on the long-term goals rather than those temporary, immediate pleasures. And so even type A individuals, their stress response might not be as bad as what the Friedman study stated. It might actually lead to that high levels of motivation to get greater levels of well-being. You get satisfaction from all the work that you've accomplished. And so looking at the satisfaction of what you've accomplished rather than how much further you have to go, that tends to be a positive type A response. Certain cultural elements could also impact your sense of well-being. How do I say this? All right, having clear goals and focusing on those progress elements, those tend to report higher levels of subjective well-being, my feelings of doing good. If we were looking at those income levels, we find within certain Latin American cultures, they are economically depressed, but they have high rates of well-being. Well, what they find is that those cultures, they focus on the goals and looking at what's been accomplished rather than what we don't have. And so that appreciation of what we have and what is present for us allows for higher levels of well-being, where other cultures where they put the emphasis on what I don't have, I compare myself to what I see others have and what I want. Even though they're wealthier countries with that mentality, there are lower rates of happiness because of that comparison to what others have and the culture valuing having the best. There is a fundamental flaw with these. Our measures of well-being tend to be more accurate within individualistic cultures than in collectivistic cultures. Individualists, they focus on what I have, where collectivists tend to focus on what we have. So trying to describe happiness, for me, it's easier in an individualistic culture because I focus on myself naturally. But trying to describe happiness for me in collectivistic cultures, well, my sense of happiness is actually built upon my group and how comfortable and how happy we are together. And so looking at things like self-esteem or self-worth, it doesn't really work well within collectivistic because their sense of well-being is actually based off of group happiness levels. If we want to look at how these positive subjective experiences can lead to better levels of happiness, as we know, happy people have positive impacts on the environment. They contribute more to their communities. They're more altruistic, more pro-social. They tend to have better relationships, and so there's lower rates of suicide, lower rates of divorce because their relationships are stronger. There's more interconnectivity. There's more creativity, so they're better at in sciences, in businesses, in artistic realms, because they can come up with new ideas relatively quickly. They tend to excel in sports and academics. They tend to take on leadership roles, and being in those leadership roles, they can inspire others and help others do better. And they tend to be less of a drain on health industries, right? They're psychologically more fit and they're physically more fit. And so by building communities that create happy people, we can hopefully actually help the health system without having all of these problems. And so because of this individual well-being, it actually leads to a better environment for the community, which improves the community's well-being, and so that everyone will become happier and then also can help them become healthier because of the lower rates of stress and anxiety that might be present within that system. Is that real? Does all this stuff actually work in the long run? Right? We find that health really doesn't correlate that much with well-being. So yes, happier people are less likely to become sick, but just because I'm happy doesn't mean I won't ever become sick. And so their emotional state and their health does have some correlation, but it's not direct. There's probably a lot of confounding variables that we might not be able to remove from a study to see how much or how little of an impact it's having. What we know is that people who have a basic healthy level don't necessarily experience any hit to their happiness levels, their sense of self-worth. So what that means is you might have allergies, or you might have a cold, or a temporary illness like the flu, or you have to have surgery for your appendix, right? Those are health issues, but they don't necessarily impact your happiness levels because they are presented as a temporary problem, right? Those people who have high well-being will easily return to it after an unpleasant diagnosis. For example, if I get diagnosed with diabetes, that's an enduring issue. And so that'll take a hit, but it's easy to manage. And so I could easily return back to my natural happiness levels. People who have suffered heart attacks, right? That's a unpleasant diagnosis of an illness, but it's manageable. It's something that you can treat and then return to normal physical health, and therefore you can return to your normal feelings of well-being. The only time that that's shown not to be true is people with multiple disabling conditions. If it prevents you from returning to a normal, healthy lifestyle, if it's not something that's easily manageable, but it's something that's enduring and disruptive to your day-to-day life. Highly happy people will be hurt by this, that getting a severe diagnosis will lower your happiness levels temporarily, but the debilitating conditions, it might rise, but you'll never go back to your normal happiness level. And so if we're looking at happiness helping you become healthier, there's some connection, but it's not as grounded going the opposite way. And so your health and happiness can be connected. So based off of this information, using your notes, I want you to choose one of the documentaries and start watching it today, and then submit the movie worksheet next class after you've had a chance to finish it. If you have any questions, I'll be on Zoom, or feel free to email me. Oh, sorry. I just wanted to stop.